Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. 7 secrets no one survives after seeing. On September 12, 1986, a special unit of the Callan Police Force and soldiers from the United States Army ventured deep into the dark tropical forests of northern South America. Their destination was a strange community that had been isolated from the human world for many years. The leader of the place was a self-proclaimed prophet named Elias Van, who had led hundreds of followers away from their homeland to hide in the wilderness. Over the course of 4 years, Van and his followers carved out a giant gap in the jungle, building a closed complex called the Valley of Enmac. The only way in was a path through the trees over 30 meters high, where sunlight could hardly penetrate. The ground was muddy and covered with leeches. But the difficulty of the journey was never the most frightening thing. What haunted everyone the most was that the leader had known early on that a force would come looking for him. It was believed that a group of heavily armed militiamen, fanatical believers willing to die for him, were waiting for the task force. However, when they arrived in Nemo Valley, what they found was not resistance, but an eerie silence. The wind did not stir the grass. The birds and beasts disappeared, and the air was thick with the smell of death. They passed through the rotten wooden gate, entered the center, and the scene before their eyes was like a hell that humans had never imagined. The entire complex was empty, no laughter, no voices, not a breath of life. Only the large house in the middle was still open, surrounded by corpses. Adults, children, men, women, all lay intertwined. Many of the bodies had begun to decompose, but still had the look of extreme pain on their faces. The sound of flies was dense, clinging to the dark skin that was peeling off in patches. It was estimated that nearly 900 people were left here, making it the most horrific massacre in the history of the United States up to that time. At first, those who witnessed it thought it was just a mass suicide of blind followers of the sect. But the deeper they investigated, the more they realized that the truth was more barbaric than all the initial hypotheses. Elias Ven's sect started out as a small group claiming to worship the God of Light in America. However, as the number of followers increased, the conflicts with the government and public opinion also became more and more severe. Van not only preached faith, but also promoted extremist ideas, even praising cold-blooded regimes in distant lands. By 1982, he led his most loyal followers into the deep forest, preaching about a promised land where people could escape all constraints and live a peaceful life. But the peace he brought was not paradise, but a terrifying ritual disguised as religion. The mysteries buried in that complex gradually emerged, each creepy trace opening like a door leading to 7 secrets that no one who witnessed could return to. Life in Enmac Valley seemed peaceful at first glance, but once you dig deeper, everything revealed its suffocating nature. Van often filmed followers eating, laughing, and having dinners with fried bananas and homegrown vegetables. He also bragged about the sandwiches the community made, and that all their farm products had won awards from the border authorities. In those footages, everyone sat around, laughing, holding up cheap sodas worth just a few US cents as proof of simple happiness. But all that was just a facade. In reality, the believers here were forced to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. No one was allowed to complain, let alone dream of escaping. Van had cleverly reached a secret agreement with the local authorities to make it almost impossible to ask to return home. The complex was surrounded by a high fence, with guards patrolling outside with guns, ready to shoot anyone who dared to make a move. Even so, cries for help still got out. Relatives of many believers in the United States began to pressure the government to bring their children back. So, in August 1986, a delegation led by Congressman Alaric Rowan and 17 others, including journalists and cameramen, set out for South America to investigate the truth about the Enmac Valley. On August 11, 1986, the delegation officially set foot in the complex. They were welcomed in a bustling atmosphere. Every corner was lit up, children were running, adults were laughing. Everything seemed just like the videos Van had released, a paradise of freedom and happiness. However, that joy was just an act. He had rehearsed the followers on how to respond, how to force a smile, how to put on a satisfied appearance to fool uninvited guests. As night fell, that shell began crack. As everyone was immersed in fake parties, Two followers, Daria and Lucia, quietly approached a group of parliamentarians. In their hands was a trembling piece of paper. The words were short but heavy as fate. They wrote, "Please help us leave here. Please save us before it is too late." The piece of paper made the atmosphere in the investigation team heavy. From that moment on, questions were asked in succession. How many others were also eager to escape? Was the laughter that echoed during the day just a veil covering a truth more terrifying than death? With courage that had been accumulated for a long time, 9 other believers in the Valley of Enmac finally stood up, expressing their desire to leave community. Even one of Elias Venn's most loyal followers joined in, revealing the harshness and cruelty of life in the complex. The next morning, Congressman Alaric Rowan's delegation took these outspoken believers to the small Quintero airport nearby, where they would be taken back to their homeland. However, as these people had just boarded the plane, a truck suddenly rushed out to block the road. Venn's henchmen immediately opened fire. 4 people were killed instantly, including Congressman Rowan, leaving unspeakable horror for those who witnessed it. Back in an MO Valley, Venn gathered all the believers in the central hall and ordered them to drink a fruit-flavored beverage laced with poison. According to him, this was the only way to avoid being pursued by foreign authorities. He loudly declared that the outside world would not forgive them, and any attempt to escape would be hopeless. Under extreme mental pressure, some of the completely brainwashed believers voluntarily drank the poisoned water, while others, including children, were forced to drink under direct threat. Some were even injected with cyanide or shot to death before drinking. The scene at the center became a picture of horror beyond anyone's imagination. The U.S. military was quickly informed of the shooting at Quintero Airport and immediately dispatched forces to an MO Valley. Unfortunately, by the time they arrived, it was too late. The scale of the tragedy, along with the forced labor of many of the victims, made the forest one of the most haunting places the soldiers had ever seen. The story of an MO Valley had not yet subsided when another gruesome event emerged from the distant past. On July 14, 1931, a mechanic named Friedrich Kessler was hired to repair a barn engine at a small house near the Weidenwald Forest in Germany. He arrived and immediately sensed something strange. The animals were running amok in the barn, but inside the house was completely silent. Not a sound from human. Kessler knocked on the door several times, calling the owner's name, but no one answered. Thinking they were not home, he waited an hour in the yard before deciding to leave. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed that the engine room door was unlocked. Although he was uneasy, he decided to repair the engine first, planning to get the money later. However, once inside, he sensed a stifling atmosphere, as if the house was keeping a deadly secret that no one who entered could escape. After finishing the repairs, Friedrich Kessler wanted to inform a neighbor about his work, but the house was completely isolated, more than half a kilometer away from the nearest house. With no other choice, he took a detour and knocked on the door of Hildegard Meinhardt, the Klingon family's nearest neighbor. However, Hildegard found the empty house suspicious. She knew the Klingons well and was sure they would report if they went somewhere. So that evening, Hildegard and 2 other neighbors decided to check it out. Indeed, the house was completely empty as Friedrich had reported. As they looked around the house, one of them noticed that the door to the machine room was unlocked. The 3 decided to go in. After checking the machine room, they broke down the barn door that connected to the machinery area to see more. But the scene inside haunted them for the rest of their lives. At first, everything seemed normal, but one of them discovered something that looked like a foot protruding from the pile of dry straw. It turned out to be the remains of Gertrude Klingon, 74, the matriarch of the family. As they approached, they discovered 3 more bodies scattered throughout the barn. Among them were Heinrich Klingon, 65, and his 2 daughters. They even found the remains of Leopold, his 2-year-old grandson, in a stroller with his skull crushed, along with the maid Anna Fisher in another room. Someone had murdered the entire Klingon family, then left without anyone noticing. The investigation later concluded that the massacre had occurred on June 9th, 1931, about 4 days before Friedrich and his neighbors arrived. But what was even more horrifying was that the killer had probably stayed in the house for hours, even after the murders, to hide the evidence by covering the bodies with hay and blankets. The maid's room was also stuffed with clothes on the windowsill, making it even more difficult to spot her from the outside. Most people initially assumed it was just the aftermath of a botched robbery, but the brutality and gruesome details made any conventional theories irrelevant. Most of the valuables were still in the house, adding to the mystery. Neighbors said the Klingons had seen men staring at their house from the woods. The previous maid, Elise Brandt, had quit a few months earlier, saying the house always felt haunted, and that someone had broken into the engine room a few days before the murder. None of these clues helped investigators find the killer, and because the house was so isolated, there were no witnesses. To this day, the Klingons' murders remain an unsolved mystery. Decades later, in May 2018, Lucas Renner was inspecting the trees in the dense forest of the community of Silverwood, California. Lucas was the Environmental Services Director for Silverwood and was conducting a routine inspection. Something unusual immediately caught his attention. Near the walkway, a strange structure was protruding from the vegetation. Lucas approached and was stunned to discover a cabin in the middle of the woods. What was strange was that this was not a hastily built shack. The cabin was very solidly built, with a solid concrete floor, plastic sheeting to protect the furniture from rain, and even a padlock on the front door. It was clear that someone had spent weeks, if not months, building it from scratch. Lucas immediately notified the Rangers, who then spent several days standing guard near the cabin to see if the owner returned. Eventually, they broke the lock to find clues about who lived there. Inside, everything seemed ready for a long stay in the wilderness. Fresh water, a wood stove, canned goods, even books neatly arranged on shelves. The cabin looked more like a cramped studio than a makeshift shelter. However, none of the items revealed the identity of the owner. After several days without anyone returning, the Rangers concluded that the cabin had been abandoned, leaving an eviction notice on the front door before leaving. But when Lucas and his team returned to demolish it, they discovered something even more horrifying. The entire cabin was gone, not a nail or piece of wood left. Instead, on the ground was an international symbol of the settler, drawn in charcoal. The incident raised many questions. How did the cabin's inhabitants always disappear before the Rangers arrived? Why were they hiding deep in the woods? Were they criminals on the run, or something more sinister? Despite the years that have passed, the mystery remains unsolved, making Silverwood as haunted as the horror stories from the Enmac Valley. In March 2017, a hiker was walking through the dense Blackwood Forest in Kentucky. In the middle of the trail, he found a surveillance camera hidden in the vegetation. This type of camera is often used to observe wildlife, but this one had no battery and no memory card. Thinking it had been left behind, he took it home and gave it to a friend to check. What neither of them knew was that the camera was a deadly trap. As soon as the friend inserted the battery, the device exploded. The force blew off the friend's fingers, and the hiker suffered a stomach wound. The device was set to explode as soon as power was restored. Upon receiving the news, authorities checked the area and discovered another camera that had been tampered with in a similar way, but there were no clues as to who had placed it. While canvassing the surrounding neighborhood, investigators finally found a breakthrough. 2 other neighbors said they had heard an explosion at the home of Colton Rains, 41, a few months earlier. When police searched Rains' home, they found buckets of bomb-making materials and a handwritten note that read, "Broken cameras for broken souls." Colton was arrested on April 28, 2017, but before he was formally charged, police wanted him to help them find the remaining bomb cameras. During this trip, Rains tried to grab an officer's gun, perhaps to escape. During the struggle, he was shot and killed. Before his death, Rains helped police find 13 other bomb cameras hidden throughout Blackwood Forest, although there may be more undiscovered devices waiting to be stumbled upon. The horror story doesn't end there. On September 16, 1990, a hunter was hiking through the densely forested Timber Hollow in Baxter State, Maine. He had walked this path many times, but this time something strange caught his eye. Hidden under a pile of leaves and branches was a rusted 55-gallon metal drum. Curious, he approached and found the dismembered bodies of 2 people inside. The police were immediately notified. The investigation revealed that the victims were a young woman and a young girl. Both had been severely beaten in the head, then dismembered and stuffed into the drum. The bodies were so disfigured that they were almost unrecognizable. The case went unsolved for years, until 2004, when a state trooper returned to the area looking for new clues. This time, he discovered another 55-gallon drum, about 140 yards away from first. Inside were remains of two other girls, ages 2 and 5, murdered in the same manner, severely beaten on the head with a blunt object and then dismembered. The discovery confirmed that all 4 murders were committed by the same perpetrator, creating a horrific series of crimes never seen before in the area. Even with this new evidence, the case remained unsolved for another 15 years. Finally, thanks to advanced DNA testing, 3 of the 4 victims were identified. The adult woman was Clara Winthrop, 25. The 2 children were her daughters, Lydia Hartwell, 8, and Emmy Lockridge, 14 months. The identification helped narrow the field of investigation, but did not immediately clear up the killer. DNA testing eventually pointed to a man named Gideon Peter Hallstrom, a convicted felon with a previous murder conviction. At the time, authorities did not know that Hallstrom had been arrested and sentenced to life in prison for killing his wife in 2004 and had died in 2012, years before DNA linked him to the Timber Hollow case. Although the case was technically solved, many questions remained unanswered. With the killer gone, the story remains one of the most haunting tragedies ever discovered in the American woods. Another case that left investigators shivering occurred in Red Elm Forest near Ashford, Washington, where a man walking his dog made a grisly discovery. The woods were isolated, with little self-service and few trails. He had walked about 2 miles down a fire road when his dog began growling at a thick brush. A foul odor filled the air, and he thought it was an animal carcass. When he went to investigate, he found a shallow pit about 5 feet wide. Inside were 6 large bundles, tightly wrapped in black plastic and duct tape, with river rocks placed on top of each bundle, as if to press them down. One of the bundles was torn open, revealing a human hand. He backed away and called the sheriff's office. A forensics team was dispatched the next day. They discovered 6 packages containing human body parts, all from at least 4 different victims, all dismembered and sealed in layers of plastic and tape. The victims had been murdered in different ways. One had severe head trauma, another had signs of strangulation, and one had partial burns. The bodies were in varying stages of decomposition, suggesting the victims had not been dumped at the same time. According to Medical Examiner, the area had been used for years, with new remains added over time. One victim was identified as a missing person from 2005, while another had never been reported missing and remained unidentified. The incident not only revealed a horrific crime, but also proved that isolated forests can still hide creepy secrets that humans have never thought of, like ghosts living in the quiet, waiting to be discovered. Even with this new evidence, the case remained unsolved for another 15 years. Finally, thanks to advanced DNA testing, 3 of the 4 victims were identified. The adult woman was Clara Winthrop, 25. The 2 children were her daughters, Lydia Hartwell, 8, and Emmy Lockridge, 14 months. The identification helped narrow the field of investigation, but did not immediately clear up the killer. DNA testing eventually pointed to a man named Gideon Peter Hallstrom, a convicted felon with a previous murder conviction. At the time, authorities did not know that Hallstrom had been arrested and sentenced to life in prison for killing his wife in 2004 and had died in 2012, years before DNA linked him to the Timber Hollow case. Although the case was technically solved, many questions remained unanswered. With the killer gone, the story remains one of the most haunting tragedies ever discovered in the American woods. Another case that left investigators shivering occurred in Red Elm Forest near Ashford, Washington, where a man walking his dog made a grisly discovery. The woods were isolated, with little self-service and few trails. He had walked about 2 miles down a fire road when his dog began growling at a thick brush. A foul odor filled the air, and he thought it was an animal carcass. When he went to investigate, he found a shallow pit about 5 feet wide. Inside were 6 large bundles, tightly wrapped in black plastic and duct tape, with river rocks placed on top of each bundle, as if to press them down. One of the bundles was torn open, revealing a human hand. He backed away and called the sheriff's office. A forensics team was dispatched the next day. They discovered 6 packages containing human body parts, from at least 4 different victims in total, all dismembered and sealed in layers of plastic and tape. The victims had been murdered in different ways. One had severe head trauma, another had signs of strangulation, and one had partial burns. The bodies were in varying stages of decomposition, suggesting the victims had not been dumped at the same time. According to the medical examiner, the area had been used for several years, with new remains added over time. One victim was identified as a missing person from 2005, while another had never been reported missing and remained unidentified. Not only did this reveal a horrific crime, it also proved that isolated forests can still hide creepy secrets that humans have never thought of, like ghosts living in the quiet, waiting to be discovered. The site was less than 10 meters from a trail that was occasionally traversed by hikers. Although the remains were found in a well-organized burial pit, no suspects were ever arrested, no fingerprints or DNA other than those of the victims were found, and no witnesses. To this day, the identity of the person who created the burial pit remains a mystery. In March 1994, a man walking along a country road near Wexford, Ireland, made a haunting discovery. Underneath a layer of dirt and rotting leaves, wrapped tightly in an old rug, was a human torso. The victim's head and both arms were missing. The arms had been cut off just below the elbows, apparently to remove any tattoos or identifying marks. Forensic analysis determined the victim was a healthy man, approximately 35 to 50 years old, likely of Central European descent. There were no matches to any missing persons reports in Ireland or the surrounding countries. The meticulous manner in which the body was dismembered suggested that the killer knew exactly what he was doing and had taken every step to completely erase the victim's identity. Investigators then launched Operation Harrow, a massive task force of more than 55 officers, with a budget of more than 140,000 euros. They scoured every nook and cranny of the area, even searching an abandoned house that had been occupied by a German man with an alias. Inside, they found only one bizarre clue, an old magazine with a few phone numbers that had no direct connection to the murder. More than 3 decades on, the victim remains unidentified, and the killer has never been caught. All that remains of the case is a media nickname, a haunting skeletal image, symbolizing the unsolved mysteries in the dark mountains and deserted roads. The story ends here. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.